find ways to redirect having a family values culture right in this family. What we want to develop is healthy executive functioning skills, not fear-based, compliance-based behavior modification. Maybe it's slamming the door today, but tomorrow it's going to be rolling their eyes or talking back. So let's give them a way to express these feelings in a healthy communication style and support them to learn what to do instead of, coming at them with what not to do.
I'm your host, Niki Wolf, and today we have a fun conversation revolved around parenting and the way that we can be approaching parenting with our children. We have an incredible guest today, CEO, speaker, advocate, author, on a mission to change the culture around parenting. She has built an extraordinary business helping children grow up to reach their full potential and live their lives free of trauma, shame, and emotional wounds. Welcome to the show, Kiva. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm really excited to be here, Niki. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I think it's such an important conversation as a new mom. We're navigating these experiences and, I have a daughter who's 15 months. So I know that they absorb so much stuff, but it's as they get older, they're really, everything is shaped by how we communicate to them and the parenting that we do. So I'm really excited to navigate this. One thing that you've done is you've built this extraordinary business, and I'd love to explore what the Jai Institute of Parenting is, your mission, and really what inspired you to create it.
Thank you. So we are the world's leading parent coach certification organization. And, if you think about it in every other aspect of our life, whether it's our health or we want to run a marathon or we want to learn to drive or we want to become an attorney, we are provided education, mentorship, support. And, when I was a young parent coaching did not exist yet. That was not a thing. But when you think about it, it's kind of crazy. Like, this is the most important job that we have. And people used to operate under a belief set that, parenting should come naturally. If I admit that I'm not doing it well, I'm kind of admitting that I'm not a good person. And I've really, in the 15 years that I've been at the helm of Jai, I've seen that change dramatically, which I think is so inspiring. People are realizing that what comes naturally is so correlated to the experiences that we had as children, to our family system, to the culture, to the community that we're in. And so that having someone who, we can talk about what coaches do in just a second. We don't give advice. That's not it. But that can support parents to become intentional, to think about the values that matter most to them, to learn to stay calm. We can't teach ourselves to do those things by reading a book about it because we've got years of reactive conditioned behaviors of patterns in our brains. And so coaches really kind of help build the muscles of living into the intentions that we have as parents.
Okay, so it sounds like the Institute is training, you are equipping these individuals who want to become parent coaches. Now, I'm guessing it's not only to support their family, but also if they want to utilize this as, their full career to help support other parents.
Absolutely. Our students are therapists, educators, pediatricians. They are also stay-at-home parents or people who are exhausted by their work, taking them away from their family, robbing them of the precious energy and time that we have and want to start their own business, doing something that really feels like their calling. I would say that that is something that I hear all the time from our students and graduates. And so at Jai, for me, this goes kind of back to my personal story, but my mom got divorced when I was really young. I'm an only child. My mom is like an epic beast, moved us to New York City, started working for one of the biggest newspapers in the country when I was like 5 years old. And so I had this front row seat to what having that kind of working mom looked like. And while I'm so grateful to women like her and her generation who, took their 80s shoulder pads and stormed the building, I knew I still was ambitious, but I didn't want that. And so while I'm passionate about parenting and parent-centric support that makes children's lives better, I'm also really passionate about giving parents a pathway to self-employment, because it's one of the only ways where we maintain control over to whom, how much, how often, and that can ebb and flow as our children have different needs as they're growing up.
You're so right. And I think one of the beauties, I know this is going to sound odd, that came out of this pandemic is the amount of opportunity to work from home. And, my job shifted prior to the pandemic where I was working from home, but I did that purposely because I knew we were trying to have kids. And the freedom, the flexibility that you have, there's nothing quite like it. And I am so grateful for it. And it sounds like what you're doing too is whether they're working from home or it's a one-on-one connection in person, you're empowering these individuals to be able to shape and craft their own life and what that looks like. And it's such a beautiful experience that I just couldn't imagine going back,
I can't either. And I've almost got 2 kids out of the house. I think there are some of us that just parenting is the most important thing. And we don't want to have to compromise that in order to earn a living. And so for me, creating this way that people can have a career where their parenting makes them better at their work and their work makes them better at their parenting for our people, right? That are just like my children, not everybody feels that way, and no judgment. It's cool. But for those of us who, that is our top priority, this is a beautiful way to execute that and have a step-by-step process to follow, not have to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what would you say is the difference between just traditional parental advice and parent coaching?
Huge difference. And I think this is a big misconception that people have when they hear the word parent coaching, is, someone's going to tell me how to raise my kids. So this is the coaching industry across the board. We have a code of ethics. And part of that code of ethics is that it is never our job to know better for another person than they know for themselves. We stay off what we call the sofa, which is suggestions, opinions, feedback, and advice. And so while here at Jai, there is very much an element of education, right? We teach child development. We teach nervous system regulation. We teach brain science. We teach empowered communication. Our coaches then really use questions to allow a parent to choose for themselves, right? Like, I don't know what your values are as a family. They might be similar to mine, or they might be very different, but those values become the anchor for the decisions and choices that we make as parents, so that we are modeling the behavior we hope our children will learn and adopt and carry out into the world with them when they're, 18 and leave the house. That is a parent's role.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned something that was so important that I want to kind of communicate is questions. So I'm a certified functional health coach. And I remember, I have my degree in health, and I've spent my, last 20 something years researching and diving into health, whether that I was a guinea pig for a drug when I was 3 years old. My whole life has been health. And so you think, okay, well, I have a lot to offer. I have a lot of education and background experience. So especially if I'm working with a client who maybe health is not even on their radar, they don't know anything, it makes sense for me to tell them, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. And that was the biggest pivot when I was going through schooling to become a health coach. You don't give advice. You don't provide the suggestions. What you mentioned is asking the questions, because, and I would still be like, well, I have a lot that I can give them. But if I'm telling somebody, or if I'm struggling with anxiety and I say, well, you should try meditation, or you should try this, or have you tried this? That might not serve them in any purpose. But instead, if I ask a question, well, what have you utilized or tried in the past when you've had experience of anxiety or panic attacks? And that might tap into something deeper that you could move the needle further with them. And so I'm so with you on that, those questions, and specifically open-ended questions. And I think, thought-provoking questions where that's where we're going to really make change happen.
As coaches, our job is to allow people to see their blind spots, to soften their defense mechanisms, to question their assumptions and limiting beliefs. if we told, if I was talking to you as a parenting coach and I was like, well, you clearly have a belief that your child is capable of less than you think they are. Woo, right? Defenses, who are you? Right? Like it almost a jive. We're here to raise empowered parents, right? Empowered parents raise empowered children. If I'm telling you what to do, by definition, that power structure between you and I is I'm more powerful than you are. I want to build you up. I want to focus on your strengths. I want to work on what's working and gently bring new awareness to where positive change might happen.
Absolutely. I love
so
that.
Cool. It's the best.
Oh, I love that. That's the kind of energy we need from, somebody who's creating a company like this, because it's just going to be trickling down to every aspect of the company. Now, what I'm really excited for is kind of the meat of this conversation today. And it got brought up. I had an acquaintance who was talking about, I can't even remember the exact details, but they said something to their kids to the extent of, well, don't do that because that's going to make mommy really upset. And, my husband's a therapist. I've been around him for a little while, but I feel like just my own experiences with therapy, I feel like I have an understanding that is now putting a lot of pressure on the kid to regulate the parent's emotions. And so I wanted to throw that scenario out with you of, what does that look like and how is that impacting the child and what might be a better approach to going about this scenario?
So let's start at the beginning. So this really speaks to emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is the ability to feel your feelings, right? There's nothing wrong with anger. In fact, it's a really important emotion in parenting. And to express that emotion without causing harm to yourself or others, right? That's kind of emotional intelligence in a nutshell. So when we communicate implicitly or explicitly to our child that they should shift their behavior to meet the adults' emotional needs, we're not providing them, number one, with a healthy, trust-based relationship with us. We're not teaching them what to do. And most importantly, we're kind of wasting our parenting battery on you pointed this out, having our kids meet our needs instead of meeting them for ourselves so that when, kiddos running across the street without holding a hand, yes, we get to be more assertive. When a child doesn't want to follow through on a commitment, right? Like we're raising strong children here. This is not permissive parenting land. That we can be with them through their discomfort, through their tears, through their anger and frustration, and still lovingly support them to do hard things. None of that can happen if they are on pins and needles that mommy's going to get mad if I do something.
Mm-hmm. Now, so let's create a scenario, your kid is eating lunch and starts throwing the food across the table. I could see, the parent might say, well, they're trying to stop the situation. Yeah. Well, stop doing that, or however you want to communicate it. My child's not quite old enough where we're having those yet, but stop doing that because you're going to make mommy mad. Right. What do we do? What's the next step?
I mean, it's actually stop doing that. In this home, we do not throw our food. Yeah. Right? Throwing food makes a mess. Throwing food is unsanitary. And I don't know about you, like playfulness and games and fun are actually like a huge part of the equation here. Because if we can support children to learn healthy behavior with a smile, with a song, with a silly dance, like food is for mouths. Like, oh, I'm going to put your food in my mouth if you don't, right? That's going to take so much of the unnecessary conflict out of parenting. There is going to be conflict in parenting with your children. Any relationship is going to have conflict. So let's find ways to redirect having a family values culture, right, in this family. And then as kids get older, right, I would say probably around the age of, it depends on the child, right, whether they're neuronormative or neurodiverse. Every child is unique. But starting to say, this is not our agreement. How would you like to handle this? How are you going to clean up the mess? How are you going to make this right? Because what we want to develop is healthy executive functioning skills, not fear-based, compliance-based behavior modification. Because, maybe it's slamming the door today, but tomorrow it's going to be rolling their eyes or talking back. So let's give them a way to express these feelings in a healthy communication style and support them to learn what to do instead of, coming at them with what not to do.
That's fantastic. And I heard a few bullet points or at least steps on what to do in that scenario. So the first one, redirect. So that could be, focusing on, or like you said, if like, look at mommy can put the food in her mouth, or just kind of maybe a healthy distraction. Would that be?
Yeah. I mean, this is a little bit age dependent, but really children before the age of 4 don't have a ton of brain capacity to remember rules, to remember conversations, and they certainly do not have impulse control. That's because their brain is so busy learning language, learning how things work, right? Like a child is not born with an adult brain that needs to be filled with adult things. They are born with a brain that's going to shift and change and reorganize itself all the way from birth until about age 26, believe it or not. That's when the brain is done developing. And so this is where understanding child development, at least with a broad strokes level, is useful. Because if it's a child under the age of 4, redirection, silly games, removing them from a situation, right? Like pleading with a child at Target to stop tantruming who is under the age of 4 is nothing's going to happen. This is what they're hearing. Because their little brain is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. They cannot hear you. So sometimes that looks like picking a child up and taking them out of the store.
Yeah.
Until we return to a co-regulated nervous systems, which we can talk about if you'd like. As children get older, we want to give them the opportunity to state their case, to take responsibility, to contribute to how they think the family should work, because that's empowerment for kids.
So let's just kind of pivot right here to that last point of giving them the empowerment of how the family works. What if you're in a scenario and they're like, well, that means we eat ice cream every single night at 10 p.m. Like, how do you go about a situation when they're like, okay, now we're taking it to a whole new level?
Yeah. So if you think about this, a leader is anyone who wants another person to do, be, or have more than they currently have. So every parent on the planet is a leader. We can be a compassionate leader and we're still the leader, right? So again, these jive parenting is not permissive parenting. It does not mean that it is not healthy for children to have no boundaries, no bumpers, no expectations of their behavior. I'll share a story that I think is maybe a better example. So when my kids were little, we were in a traffic jam. Everyone was hangry. They were bickering in the back seat. It's hot. And they're going at it. And I just lost it. I mean, I wasn't a big yeller ever, but I yelled. And when I yelled, because it was so rare, everyone would cry. They would cry. I would cry. And so I did what we call repair. Oof, that was not my best moment. Mm-hmm. I yelled, and I don't like when I yell. And I know that you guys don't like when you yell. And then I said, what ideas do you guys have? And they're probably, Niki, they're like 4 and 6 at the time. They're pretty little. Mm-hmm. And what ideas do you have so that I can't remember the words I used, so that like I can do better next time? And my son said, well, how about mommy? The next time that you feel yelling coming up in your body, you say, hey guys, I feel yelling coming up in my body. And, it's 12 years later and it's still like a big family joke for us, but that was brilliant advice. Yep. Yep. And because my son was the one who came up with it, he had agency, he had ownership. So when he heard me say, I'm feeling yelling coming up in my body, he was like, oh, that's what I told mom to do before this boundary that we agreed upon was crossed. That's way different for a child than don't yell, don't yell, don't yell, don't yell. Do you see?
Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense. I mean, I think about when you're cooking a meal together and you have the kid involved, even from the very beginning, when you get them in the garden to grow vegetables, they have this ownership of it.
Yes.
And it's such more of a connected experience, and they love the process, and they might eventually love the spinach or love the broccoli because they've been involved with this, because they created it. So I love that experience. And, I think it pulls me back to, naturally, kids want boundaries. Naturally, kids, like, they want to do the right thing. I mean, they might chuckle or laugh at the idea of an ice cream. But I think if you do give them that empowerment, and I don't have a lot of experience in this, but that empowerment to make a good decision, what would you do in this scenario? Or what would, giving them, putting that on the table, I think that intrinsically they would pick a good choice.
Yeah. I mean, listen, kids are going to push boundaries because they're trying to figure out how to get their needs met in a world that they do not understand. And so it is very normal for children to lie. It is very normal for children to not tell us the truth. They're experimenting because that's how they're going to figure out how the world works. And so they need us to teach them appropriate and positive behavior. Where I think parents really, gently, we can turn the mirror around and look at ourselves is, if I'm not expressing my emotions conscientiously, if I'm not speaking kindly, if I'm yelling for my child to stop yelling, that is actually how they learn, right? They actually learn relating skills through the relationship they actually have with us, not what we use with our words, but what we do with our bodies and our tone and our faces. And so, really what we are doing here at Jai is helping people to become congruent, meaning that their insides match their outsides, right? So that can look like nervous system regulation tools, but it can also look like learning how to communicate anger, because it's a really important emotion when we're raising children, right? We can say, we had an agreement that you were going to pick up your room before you went to school today, and it is not, and I am feeling angry. What can we work on together to have this not happen again? So different than the way that so many of us were parenting, right? What's wrong with you? La, 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 la. And this is where we start to chip away at self-confidence and self-worth and start to create an identity around I'm irresponsible. I'm not lovable if I don't do what mom says. I need to people please, or I need to become the authoritative bully in the room to get my needs met, right? Like if you just look out into the world and how people speak to each other, what I see is a lot of emotional immaturity, not because anything's wrong with people, but because we weren't taught these skills when we were young. And so we're the generation of parents that are like, okay, you know what? Let's learn to be like actual human adults.
I love that so much. And I think there's a spectrum of there's, the gentle parenting. And then there is a spectrum of what feels right to you. But I'm so with you of I remember my mom telling me when I was a kid, I'm not your friend until you're 18. Yeah. I'm your parent. And correct. I personally believe that. I think our parents need to be our guide. It need to be, mentor, we can be friends later on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like if you think about athletics, like a tough coach is not going to let you off the hook. I was a really serious dancer growing up. Like there was no not showing up. There was no not giving my all. And I think that as parents, there are things that we can learn from that experience that we had of who are the people who made us better human beings. And how can I be that to my child? I think this whole gentle parenting thing, while I'm grateful for the intent of moving away from overly punitive parenting, I am deeply concerned that today's children are not being given the tools to be resilient, to have grit, to be strong, to do things even when they're hard. And it's terrifying. I mean, having two kids, going into college, what I see is like, oh my gosh, this is
I couldn't agree more. It's entitlement. It's removing every possible trigger so that they don't have to go through anything difficult. Yep. I mean, I resiliency, I feel like is like my word of life of like, I think it's such an important thing that builds you up to be capable to handle anything. I'm going through like this gut health journey. And I think about, we build resiliency in therapy so that we can handle any scenario. I also want to build a resilient gut so that I don't have to keep pulling out different things in my diet. I mean, and I say there's time and a place if you're, celiac and can't do gluten and whatnot. But if we're constantly removing things, we're not building up that strength. And that's what resiliency is how can I make my gut so strong that it can handle anything? And I think to your point is there's just so many parents out there that are letting the kids parent.
They're afraid of children's emotions. I think in a way, like we've become kind of a culture so attuned to people's emotional states. And I get it, right? Like we want to have empathy. We want to have compassion. And there is this way where if parents are like, oh my gosh, if I do this, my child is going to be upset, so I can't do it. We're not building strength. Mm-hmm. We're not building independence. We're not building decision-making skills. If, they have a challenge and we solve it for them, they aren't learning how to solve their own problems. And that is not setting them up for success in the future. It's a big problem, Niki, honestly. And it's something I'm kind of like stake in the ground shouting from the rooftop about, because this is not that.
Yeah, no, I love that so much. And it can start at such a young age. I mean, even right now when my daughter is learning to walk and play with certain toys and we want to naturally grab her and just move her to the spot that she's trying to get to, it's like, let her struggle. Let her figure that out on her own, because she might find a new approach to it, or like that's how they develop is through this experience. And so to learning to pause a little bit and let them figure it out.
Correct. I remember when my son was little, he's like super bold, like the kid who would jump in the pool before he knew how to swim with a smile on his face as he drowned, climbing to the tops of trees and jumping from one tree to the other. And I remember going on a play date and other moms being, he could get hurt. And I remember just, going and thinking to myself, I would rather him have a broken arm than a broken spirit.
Yep.
And we've got to, of course, none of us want our children to be hurt. They are going to be hurt.
Yes.
Emotionally, physically, it's going to happen. And if we're so protective, we're teaching them that the world is scary and dangerous and that they should stay home on their phones because it's a scary place out there. And that's not true. Life is also brilliant and exciting and full of adventure. My daughter just got back from a trip to Greece and Italy with her best friend. They're 18. And yes, I was
I bet.
And yes, I did make her find my iPhone on so that I could track her. Full communication about it.
Absolutely.
Boundaries around check-ins when they got back to their place every night. And now she's home and she's telling me the stories. And I'm like, I'm so glad you didn't tell me those while you were still there.
Oh, totally. And that's where it's like, it's the balance of like, okay, we want to let them explore and they're going to get hurt. But also, okay, you don't want to just be so removed that they're playing in the pool and we're not even watching. Like there is a healthy balance between the two of those.
Correct.
Now, I want to pull back to something you mentioned a little bit earlier. And I'm curious if you do this in your parent coaching. You talked about family values and understanding your personal family values so that when you can, once you've gone through the pivot and the redirection, you can say, well, in our family, we value this, or we don't do this, or we do this. How do you suggest this conversation? Because maybe, I even think with my husband and I, like, I'm gung-ho to try all these things and like, let's figure out, this. Yeah. And maybe your partner isn't necessarily as okay, let's sit down and let's build this fun thing together. Yeah. How do you advise a family or, coming up with their family values so that you can utilize this?
So in my book, it's called The Peaceful Parenting Revolution. There's a whole chapter and process around this. If we go back to this idea that parenting really is executing leadership, a leader needs to know what the goals are, right? Where are we going and how can I inspire the people that will help me get there to get on my team and to have ownership like we talked about? And so, one of the things that I love about our work is there's no right. And, especially for partners, spouses, co-parents, being aware of each other's values, where they're the same and where they're different, will get rid of so many conflicts because we want to respect another person's right to have a different value than us. And so if I know that my husband has a value around respect, let's say, that I feel more kind of like doesn't matter that much to me, I don't want to make him wrong for that value. Mm-hmm. Now we can have a conversation around, okay, how do you define respect? When do you feel disrespected? When do you know that you're feeling respect? And how can I help you to get this need met that you have? And so I would say that if you're wanting to parent with less yelling, conflict, bickering, resorting to punitive measures that may work in the short term but cause harm to the relationship with your children in the long term, defining values is essential. Family conversations around values. That's like, what's our income goal, right? If we're saving money, it's like, what do we want to teach our kids? We want to teach them to make good decisions. In my family, education is really, really important. You know, I come from a family of highly educated, family members, and it's just really important to us. So it's like in our family, we read together every night. It was, maybe other people's family value, but for me, that was vital. Readers are leaders. My kids will still roll their eyes, but this is the foundation of parenting successfully.
Yeah. And maybe not even just parenting. I think even marriage in general, it's so important to have these values that if you are in a moment of argument when, like you said, your cortisol is super heightened, your adrenaline, where you can't necessarily think clearly, when you can pull back to those values, that will kind of very quickly remind you, okay, what is the direction this conversation should go in? And I think more than anything, when you have kids, especially as they get a little bit older, and our brains are just so swamped that you can't even think clearly. If we have those values that do not change and that those are solidified in our family, I think it's a little bit easier to guide that conversation.
It's so true. I hear from so many of our coaches, like, I came to Jai because I wanted to be a parent coach, but you saved my marriage. Or this adorable woman yesterday made a video about how now her longtime partner is finally comfortable asking her to marry him. He's proposing because she's learned to not, to allow him to be himself and to be fully solid in herself and her identity. It's like, yes, this is parent coaching, but really it's like personal growth work for parents. And I love that. It's so good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what does the future look like for Jai? Are there certain programs that you guys are building out? What's kind of on the horizon?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we are really committed to being the best parent coach training program available. We are committed to being up to date on the latest research, child development, nervous system science, brain science. We're kind of brain geeks around here. And so that continues to be our vision, to train competent and confident parenting coaches to take this work into their online or offline world. Because, as one person, I can impact whatever. But if we're like an army of change makers doing this work, we can change the world. And so I'm really focused on continuing to bring people into our community who are as passionate about this conversation and parenting in this way as I am. And, we've always got coach training cohorts starting. We start new cohorts probably 3 to 4 times a month. And so we'll see after that. I don't know. I'm at the end of my parenting journey, Niki. So I'm kind of like, we'll just let it be what it is. Being a business owner is crazy.
I was going to say, I can imagine. I can't imagine at all. Okay. So your second is starting college, correct?
Yes, she is headed out in August to the University of Miami.
Oh my goodness. How exciting. What's her degree?
She is a history major and considering going to law school. We'll see.
Wow. Very cool. What an exciting new chapter.
Thank you.
Well, is there any lasting things that maybe I haven't covered on the importance and the values of Jai and what you're doing? Maybe we're speaking to that parent who is struggling and how to regulate their own emotions or regulate their children's emotions. And maybe they feel a little bit stuck. what would you say to them?
So our own ability to regulate our nervous system, to stay right. Like kids are chaotic. They're going to be loud. They're going to jump off the table, right? I'm not saying that they should, but if we're meeting their escalated nervous system with our escalated nervous system, nothing good is going to come of that exchange. Children don't have the ability to regulate their own nervous system. They're going to feed off of us, right? We know this intuitively. And so this skill of learning to be able to stay calm, regardless of what's happening, even if you're angry, right? Like I can talk to you about being angry with this kind of voice. Mm-hmm. And that's a learnable skill. And so I would say that would be the place where I would start, because if you can do that, now your child is going to do co-regulation with you, right? They're also going to pick up on your nervous system and say, hey, buddy, let's take a breath together. I'm going to put some cold water on my face. Would you like to put some cold water on your face too? Oh, that was a lot that last few minutes. What would help you right now? Right. And then from there, hey, like that hitting your sister thing that got mommy so mad, that's not okay. We don't hit in this family. What are other ways that you can get your energy out of your hands, right? Like what are other ways that if you're feeling frustrated will help you feel better, but don't include hitting your sister because we do not hit in this family. And so that regulation piece, you can't do what I just modeled.
Totally.
Can't even fake it. They know. They're so smart.
Yeah. Yep. And again, it comes back. I just think of marriage. It's like when you're in a fight with your partner and one elevates, it's so easy for the other to constantly escalate and you're never going to get to a resolution. And so when we can calmly communicate, where we're at, our concerns, whatnot, I think it allows for a much better resolution.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to hear the brain science of why that is?
Oh, please tell us.
Okay. So that's a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, right? It's what happens when our nervous system senses danger, whether there's real danger or not, right? So when we were evolving, there's a tiger, we need to run, we need to fight, we need to crouch. Now our nervous system perceives danger as loud children bickering or someone being angry with us. For a lot of us women, especially, that can really trigger a fight or flight response. So what happens is our body floods with cortisol and adrenaline. That signals the brain to move all of its resources into the survival mechanisms of the brain, right? You're going to have blood run to your extremities. That's why your face will start to be hot. Your hands will start to sweat. And you lose access to the prefrontal cortex, which is the reasoning center of your brain. It's literally turned off. And so now what's happening is your inner 3-year-old is having an argument with your partner's inner 3-year-old, or your inner 3-year-old is having an argument with your actual 3-year-old. And no good is going to come of that. And so it really is an act of self-love, right? To say like, hey, you know what? I'm going to take a time out, go lean against a wall, right? Go put your feet in the dirt. Different people, different tools work best for. But then you can come back and say like, all right, let's start over. Let's try that again.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so important to what your point of like, you have the ability to do this in the moment with your children too, getting them involved. Let's take some deep breaths. I saw this really cute thing where I was like, let's blow out the candles and
yeah.
And I'm like, there's so many fun ways to go about that. But I think only good can come from regulating our nervous system and calming the body before we have any further discussion. So, well, this was wonderful. This was really good to understand the mechanisms and the importance of parent coaching and how important it is to regulate our nervous system so that we can best support our children and allow them to be resilient, to be strong, to be capable, to live life to its fullest without all these traumas and stressors, and maybe not stressors, because stressors are a part of life. And I think it adds to resilience.
Correct.
So, well, thank you so much.
I love this conversation. Could chat about this all day.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Take care, Kiva.
Thanks for having me, Niki.
Of course.